How's it going, everyone? And welcome once again to another episode of Animal Talk Podcast in collaboration with SACA, the South African Animal Keepers Association. My name is Ryne.
And my name is Ayrton. Hey Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How's your week been?
It's been interesting, little ups and downs, but otherwise not too bad. The weather has been keeping okay-ish, so that's been good. Even though we're stepping into the winter period now, it's down here on the south coast been quite warm, so quite enjoying that.
That's really good. Well, you know what they say, as long as there's more ups than there are more downs.
Yes, 100%.
Well, for today, I thought we could talk about quite an interesting topic, or one that I think always tends to come up. I don't know if it's happened to you, but whenever I go out with a group of friends or I'm at a family function and somebody asks me, "Oh my word, you work at this facility or you work with these kinds of animals." And there's always this real interest of, the aquarium and the zoo industry. But then you'll always find at that table there's somebody that has a very kind of negative experience or kind of view of the industry. And it's really always kind of very challenging for me as an individual to kind of first bite my tongue, absorb the information that they've said, and then kind of formulate a response that would essentially satisfy their concerns, but at the same time still stand in my truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I thought today we could talk about a very interesting topic that is animals being released from captive environments. There are a lot of facilities that breed animals for reintroduction into the wild, and I thought maybe we could cover facilities like that and just why they're so different to, you know, zoos and aquariums. But there are also some exceptions, and I think we've chatted about them on across quite a few of our episodes of some animals, even in the facility where I work, that get released quite regularly. So I thought it could be just a really interesting topic, and I'm sure our listeners would also be very interested to, you know, weigh up all the different scenarios that happen in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very important to have as much knowledge about things as possible because knowledge is power. So 100% we can get diving into it and see where we go.
Awesome. So I think maybe where we can start is, and it's something that I only realized a few years ago, was this idea of, and this word captivity, and really what it means and how we kind of define what an animal in captivity is. And I think the kind of the best conversation that I was ever in was one that actually happened at one of the workshops that I think I attended. I don't think you were there. This conversation came up, and there was kind of like this clear decision made of you get zoos that are captivity, and you get game reserves that are kind of essentially wild. And it was really clearly introduced this concept of what a fence line is. And having a fence line around a camp makes it a captive environment. So when you go to a zoo, you see all the different animals and they're in their own individual camps. But when you go to a game reserve, it's kind of because the space is it's kind of so vast, you don't really see the fence lines, and automatically your mind tells you that this is open space. It's endless. It's kind of this big open wild natural environment, but there is a fence line, and essentially what you are in a game reserve is
An
ex-
enclosure.
an enclosure. And that conversation was so relevant and just kind of brought me back to earth on where the industry is today, and how just, members of the public can be persuaded otherwise on how different a zoo can be to a game reserve, just based on something as simple as a fence line.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of scary how that can be the game changer,
I see what you did there.
so to speak, seeing as we're talking about game reserves. Yeah, no, 100%. And, in this day and age and over many years, wildlife has been having to be put, that's how we would say it, into the game parks and reserves in that type of captive situation, because we can't have those wild spaces everywhere anymore. It's too dangerous for the animals in the first place and too dangerous for the people. So, in some sense, in any way, most of our game parks and reserves are, like you said, fenced and are captive situations, just on a much larger, bigger scale. And yes, there's things that you don't have to do because they're fending for themselves in most cases. But in some cases, there has to be some sort of control of population, because if they get overpopulated, there's nowhere for them to move naturally. So then that comes into play of a management strategy, which is exactly what a zoo has to do. So it's kind of very similar, just slightly different.
Yeah, and it's that slightness of difference that is quite surreal when you start putting everything under the microscope and start analyzing. They're really not that different. The other thing that came up in that conversation as well was the fact that, as you said, you have to manage populations in a game reserve. It's kind of now, in today's time, it's very frowned upon to feed live food to animals in zoos. The same with keeping predator and prey together. It's not going to work out. But in game reserves, it's the complete opposite. You've got a bunch of animals you've put into one large fenced camp, and as you said, they have to fend for themselves. They have to escape the predators, but they can only escape the predators to a certain point before they reach the fence line again. So you end up having this kind of overemphasized enclosure that starts seeming worse off than
Mhm.
a zoo enclosure, because your predator and your prey are all living together.
Yeah, and predators seem to know that very well, and they are clever, like any animal, and they learn how to use those structures to benefit them. So, I've seen a lot of footage and heard of a lot of stuff, and seen it myself, of predators chasing prey towards the fence line to use it as a barrier so that they can be successful in their hunt. So, technically, that is then the enclosure end. So yeah, it's one of those things.
Yeah, and then looking at it from the animal care perspective, I know we've spoken about it a lot. When it comes to animals that are in, we're talking about accredited zoos and aquariums that are, they have trained staff that know what they're doing, and they are looking after these animals that are in this environment. I think we've spoken many a times about our animals that we've gotten to work with, and it's kind of this feeling of the animal just has to sneeze and we're concerned over their well-being. So it's also a very different environment, in the sense of, like you mentioned with game reserves, they're out there. If you get injured, you become a food item. There's very limited kind of interaction, in the sense of someone coming in and taking care of you if you get injured. Whereas in zoos and aquariums, it's the complete opposite. If we see animal with a slight limp, we maybe observe them for a while, but eventually intervene if it gets worse. And that's just to improve their overall quality of life so that they're not suffering. And I think that really does get taken away to a certain degree when animals are put into these so-called, wild spaces, which is also a very kind of sensitive side to think of when it comes to the animals and what they essentially going through in that environment. Also, we have, on-site vets, so the animals are kind of very much protected, and a lot of institutions are having animals that are born into those captive environments. So, they're really not used to harsh weather conditions or uh, different items, like approaching the fences or their camps. So when you look at animals in zoos and then trying to put them into the space of a game reserve, it's also there's kind of this such a slight difference between what they are, but then also such a massive difference in terms of what the animals physically, mentally, emotionally, what they need in order to be successful candidates to be in those environments.
Yeah, definitely. And it goes both ways if you think about it too, because I think there's been a bit of a shift as well with a lot of facilities now. I can talk from a facility I was recently working at a few years ago. A lot of the animals that end up at facilities now are injured and cannot be released into the wild. And I think it's the same for you in some senses as well. There are some animals that are injured that come to you and end up staying as ambassador animals. And I think that's also where the shift comes in and things are slowly changing. But as you said, there are animals that are born into facilities, and for them to end up having been born there, got used to living that sort of life and being looked after and getting all that medical help, then ending up just put out into the wild, so to speak. Kind of, yeah, it's just a little bit, can be a little bit challenging sometimes for that animal and its well-being, because it's got to take a complete mindset change. And if you look at animals that come in from the wild that have injuries, they have to be rehabilitated into the wild. They can't just come in, get fixed up, and then go. It's very difficult to just do that because the success rate is very low once you just release, because they need to go through a process of enabling them to rehabilitate themselves and sort of get back into the mindset of living out in the wild.
Yeah, it's both difficult for them going in, but also going out. And I think, especially from a rehabilitation aspect, there's there's a lot of animals that come into rehabilitation centers and because of their injuries either are deemed non-releasable or are there for such an extended period of time that they become so habituated to people that as a result they can't be released into those environments because they've just become too desensitized and they've formed bonds with their human carers. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. And I think that's why I wanted to bring this topic up today, is because it's just this overall concept of, it's not as simple as taking an animal from a zoological facility and then putting it into a reserve, or putting it into another thing we can talk about is a sanctuary. And I mean, when we talk, I don't know, maybe I can ask you, what would you classify a sanctuary as?
I would think a sanctuary is very much like a small type of reserve with a lot of rehabilitated animals. And I think there's a lot of places that are good for that type of stuff, and a lot of species that have the ability to be able to be released into those sort of situations. So there is definitely space for that type of thing in sanctuaries. And also, we know, and sort of going on a different track here slightly, but we also know that zoos will also release conservation animals back into the wild. But it takes a lot of work to get to that point. They don't just breed rhino and then take the bred rhino from the zoo and release it back into the wild. There's a lot that goes into it. So Yes, I think a sanctuary is a stepping stone. Let's say that.
So the other problem that comes up now, and this was also this was also another conversation that I was fortunate to be in, is the fact that we have this concept of what a sanctuary is, but essentially by definition, a sanctuary is a place that doesn't charge members of the public to view or to see the animals. And this is, I think, where we're having a large problem in the industry, is there are a lot of sanctuaries that seem to be very genuine sanctuaries that do charge, entrance fee, because they need to generate some form of income in order to keep those animals, happy and thriving in that environment. But then there are places that also fall under the same kind of sanctuary name or bracket, we can say, and they are using that as almost like a disguise, which I think just ends up spoiling, the facilities that are doing it the right way. So I think if you are listening to this, you also just have to be careful. When you do visit facilities, there are certain things that you might pick up on if you've been in the industry, like Ryan and I. There's certain things, I know Ryan will probably have his own list of things that you just automatically can start picking up on, and things seem a bit off, and it isn't necessarily, how would I say, about the animals themselves. It's more about generating a profit. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, those facilities are out there, and when they do get kind of pinpointed and, become common knowledge of what's going on, it really just leaves a bad taste in the name of every other facility that is actually doing their hard work as a true sanctuary.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know that there are associations out there. For example, like SACA, the South African Animal Keepers Association. There's also the African Association for Wildlife and Human Care, which is AWAC. And these associations are all there to assist and ensure that the facilities that are out there that are registered and that are doing things correctly and ethically are the ones that people should be supporting, and understanding that everything is controlled ethically, welfare is taken care of, and all of those type of things. So it's important for people to do research and understand what facilities they should be visiting and which ones they shouldn't be.
Indeed, indeed. I think, as you mentioned earlier, knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you understand, and the more you kind of read up for yourself, the more you can also make more informed decisions. And that's really, I think, what the what our industry is all about, is when you know better about something, you do better because you have that knowledge. So it's also not to say that, you know a specific facility that's trying to do their best but is understaffed or underfunded isn't trying to make improvements for, the better of the animals. But these things also do take time, they take money. I'm sure Ryan can attest to the fact that, animals, working with animals, looking after animals, it really takes a whole team, and it takes a lot of money in terms of food costs, cleaning costs, maintenance costs. So there's a much bigger picture, and I think even maybe a bigger conversation that we can have at some point around all of this.
Yeah, so this takes us back, I think, to keep a burnout, because looking after animals can be extremely stressful, and you're looking after a living being. So we need to not forget that there are people in all of these facilities that are extremely passionate about animals and very caring about animals, and they do take animals' welfare and all of that into account and are very compassionate about their animals. But there can be times where they're burning out, and it's because of those things that you just spoke about. There's lack of funding, facilities not 100%. All of those type of things can really affect the situation. So people just got to take everything into account when assessing things like that, and what they choose to look at and have an opinion on.
Yeah, I think, and that's also something really important is for you as an individual to, formulate your own opinion. And that's why social media can also be extremely dangerous. And it's been very detrimental to a lot of facilities. I mean, if we look at the entire, SeaWorld situation that happened a few years ago, mainly because people share things on social media without checking, you know, if it's actually true, or they have no involvement in the situation, but they're happy to share it because there's something in that particular post or video or whatever it may be that they can kind of relate to. So I think it's also just really important that if you are a member of the public and there is something shared about a facility, about a specific animal, you know, do your own kind of investigating. And I would really say you go and visit that facility, go see those animals, go see the enclosure, go see what the keepers get up to and what they do, and really just formulate your own individual opinion. I think that is really what the industry needs the most right now, because somebody will, take an image, they'll take it out of context, it gets put onto Facebook, and the next minute, it's shared everywhere, and automatically a facility is being boycotted, or people have a negative, opinion or association around that facility. But not only does it damage, that reputation of that facility, but as Ryan mentioned, there's so many keepers that are working every single day to make sure that those animals are stimulated, that they get everything that they need in a day-to-day basis. I mean, you've heard both of us talk about how much, love and care we put into the animals that we've gotten to work with over the years. So it's not only just this institution. There's people on the ground that get up every single day, that go to work, and their job is to make sure those animals are okay, to care for those animals. So it's not only for the benefit of you as an individual, but for those keepers that are working tirelessly for those animals. And then also for the overall industry as well, because as soon as one facility gets, labeled, it's this whole concept of zoos and aquariums. We all get grouped together, and unfortunately, it starts painting every facility with the same paintbrush. And I think it's a real concern, just the power that social media has, but how it seems to almost, you know, what you see in the media, it seems to get worse and worse and worse, because I don't know, sometimes if you go on Facebook, there's 1,000 specialists there that didn't, work in the industry at all, but they all have a fighting opinion of what goes on in the industry. So I think it's really, really important, that you do your homework and go see the facility for yourself.
I definitely agree with that. Also, we're going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, and we've only got a short amount of time. But talking about social media, something that's been really bugging me when I'm on social media is the amount of AI created stuff that is painting zoological facilities, aquariums, and these captive facilities in a bad light because of what they're doing with that AI, and generating these videos of the most recent one I saw, which I thought was really dumb, and people were like, "Oh my word, how did that happen?" Was a lady feeding a giraffe off a platform at a zoological facility, and then the giraffe grabs her shirt and pulls her and runs with her, and you can see it's AI because the giraffe is running incorrectly. The lady's just dangling in the air, half behind, and then the keepers jump over the fence into the facility and start running and shouting, "It's okay, ma'am, we'll be with you now." These things can really damage a lot of facilities. So people need to be very much aware that there's a lot of AI generated stuff out there, and you need to just know what you're looking at and understand that these are fake things that are just being made to try and get people to freak out about certain things.
Yeah, it's the interesting world that we we live in, and it's the world that we have to keep adapting to each and every day. It's making it very, there's a really good like positive side of AI. The amount of information and things that you can find now is amazing, but unfortunately in the wrong hands, it can also be detrimental.
Definitely can. But before we start delving into another very dark rabbit hole, I think we will end off and leave this for another discussion, and maybe we'll get some people discussing some things with us. So if you are interested in chatting to us, you can get a hold of us on our email, which is animal.talk201@gmail.com. And we also have our social media.
We on pretty much everything: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Our handle is animaltalk_ZA. So please go and like our various pages, follow us, subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, and just help us to really spread the podcast so that we can reach even more listeners and followers.
Definitely. And if you want to know anything more about Saka or even Awak, which we have mentioned, the information about them will be down at the bottom of the description of this podcast. So please click on there and go and have a look and do some research and see what those associations are all about. But from myself, like I always say, animals are our passion.
Thanks everybody for tuning in once again, and remember that our quality of care is their quality of life. Bye everyone.
Bye bye.
Really generate like generate generate formulate.
Sorry, I was just thinking of a generator going off. Anyway, continue as you were.